nations. 2 weeks ago, the United States and Britain unleashed their massive air power over the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, claiming that Iraq had not met and would never meet the terms of the United Nations resolutions on arms inspections. Cruise missiles slammed into Baghdad for 4 consecutive nights, letting up only with the start of Ramadan, the holiest period in the Muslim calendar. In a repeat scenario of the Gulf War, almost all the casualties turned out to be civilians, although no official statistics were released. The Pentagon, however, insisted that only military and security facilities were targeted to disable the Iraqi war machine. In reality, hospitals and residential districts were shelled, and Iraqi officials did not hesitate to show evidence of the carnage to the world. The airstrikes were condemned by many countries, including China and Russia, which withdrew its ambassadors from Washington and London in protest. Demonstrations condemning the bombings were held across the world, from New York to London, the West Bank and Damascus, often turning violent. This time the world appeared to be telling the United States that it had gone too far, but the damage had already been done. Innocent Iraqi civilians are already undergoing untold hardships because of sanctions, and the latest acts of aggression have only added to their misery. Living under the threat of further punishment raining down from the skies, Iraqis are unlikely to be bringing in a happy new year. The enemies of the United States launched a vicious attack in August, bombing the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. 253 people were killed and more than 5,000 injured in the simultaneous car bomb explosions in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. The United States blamed Muslim radicals for the attacks, and cruise missile strikes were launched against alleged terrorist bases in Afghanistan and Sudan. Despite worldwide outrage, the American government never produced the evidence to justify its action. Trouble in the Balkans reached a crisis this year as an upsurge of ethnic violence in the Serbian province of Kosovo brought worldwide condemnation. With no end in sight to the war between separatist ethnic Albanian guerrillas and Serbian security forces, Western nations threatened Yugoslavia with sanctions. Thousands of ethnic Albanians were forced to flee from their homes, and there were repeated allegations of civilians being massacred by Serbian forces. After numerous warnings to stop the killings, NATO was ready to launch an attack in October, but just hours before the deadline, Serbian forces began a mass withdrawal from Kosovo. The prospect of a lasting peace in the Middle East continues to be a dream. 19 months of deadlock on a land for peace deal between the Israeli and Palestinian sides came to an end in October with the signing of the American-brokered Wye River Peace Accords. But a suicide car bomb attack in Jerusalem in November seemed to be sending out a message that real peace was only possible on paper and political speeches. In late November, Israel handed over control of the first portion of West Bank land. But Israel has now suspended the handover, and early elections have been called after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition broke up over the peace deal. In Northern Ireland, there was hope for peace after almost 3 decades of sectarian bloodshed, when political parties signed a long-awaited accord in April. The deal preserved Northern Ireland's links with Britain while building closer ties with the Irish Republic. But the peace process suffered a crushing blow in August when a car bomb exploded in the northern Irish town of Omagh. 29 people were killed.
"1998 has been tough on Asia. At Hong Kong, watch HK 1998 Riding the Storm and see for yourself. Tonight at 9 o'clock on World.
Survive took a radical new turn in September when Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad introduced measures to isolate the economy, saying free market economics had failed. Japan finally appeared to rouse itself from a deep sleep in October and give in to worldwide demands that it take the lead in bringing the region out of the crisis. In October again, there was more good news as American Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan announced the trimming of interest rates. But the crisis is far from over. In fact, assessments are now indicating the threat of a worldwide depression. No miracle cure is expected in 1999, and the IMF has warned of a deeper, wider, and more prolonged downturn. The year brought no relief for Cambodia's political troubles. Pol Pot, the man responsible for the deaths of more than 1.5 million Cambodians, died of a heart attack in April. Cambodia went to the polls in July, and strongman Hun Sen's ruling party emerged the victor, although he did not have enough seats to form a majority of his own. Opposition leaders began demanding an investigation into allegations of vote fraud, and the mass demonstrations that followed were frequently broken up by security forces. Last month, Hun Sen formed a coalition government with opposition leader Norodom Ranariddh. A one-time movie star was elected president of the Philippines as one of the world's rowdiest democracies went to the polls in May. Joseph Estrada's first test as a leader came in November when Manila accused China of building a naval support structure in the disputed Spratly Islands. However, the two countries managed to avert a crisis. Japan had its fair share of political turmoil as Prime Minister Ryutaro Hashimoto resigned in July after a humiliating electoral setback. The man chosen to succeed him was Keizo Obuchi, faced with two difficult jobs: cleaning up a banking system burdened by bad loans and engineering a recovery in an economy hit by the worst recession since the Second World War. In Russia, the increasingly erratic President Boris Yeltsin surprised the world in March by sacking his Prime Minister, Viktor Chernomyrdin, along with the entire cabinet, and naming young reformer Sergei Kirienko as premier. In August, Mr. Yeltsin sacked the cabinet again and renamed Mr. Chernomyrdin as Prime Minister. But he was forced to give up the idea amid vehement opposition by the Duma. In September, Yevgeny Primakov was approved as premier by the Duma. Demands for Mr. Yeltsin's resignation were stepped up in October. Thousands of protesters took to the streets, calling for an end to his 7-year rule and a return to the old Soviet era. Doubts about his ability to rule are growing stronger as his health continues to deteriorate. The 16-year rule of Germany's Chancellor Helmut Kohl was brought to an end when his Christian Democratic Alliance was beaten by Gerhard Schröder's Social Democratic Party. The issue that brought him down was mass unemployment. The threat of a major regional war in Central Africa remained strong this year after armed conflict broke out in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. At least 6 of the country's 9 neighbors were pulled into the conflict as President Laurent Kabila's forces fought for control against rebel troops. Despite a ceasefire announced by the United Nations in November, the fighting continued. 1998 was the year when nuclear ambitions on the Indian subcontinent were finally realized. India earned worldwide condemnation when it conducted 5 underground nuclear tests in May. The act was seen as both a political gimmick by a Hindu nationalist government leading a fragile coalition and a defiant assertion of might by a country living amid hostile neighbors. While patriotic Indians celebrated the event, the United States immediately announced sanctions and Japan suspended aid. Despite an international effort to restrain Pakistan, India's Islamic neighbor retaliated later the same month. Pakistan conducted 6 tests. The initial threat of a nuclear conflict between the two countries died down as they settled down to continue an ongoing border war in Kashmir. The fundamental question that came to light over the controversy was an age-old one. Why should one nation have the right to hold nuclear weapons over another? 1998 was not spared from disasters. Aviation took off to a bad start in February when a China Airlines Airbus traveling from Bali to Taipei crashed at Taipei's international airport. All 203 people on board died. The same month, a low-flying American military plane crashed into cable car wires at an Italian ski resort. The cable car plunged 200 meters, killing 20 people. Charges were filed in March against the 4 American pilots involved in the crash. In September, a Swiss airplane en route from New York to Geneva crashed into the sea off the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada. The plane had been trying to make an emergency landing. All 229 passengers and crew were killed. Relatives of the victims spent weeks waiting to recover the bodies of their loved ones. In June, 100 people were killed when an intercity express train derailed in northern Germany. Halloween celebrations turned into a nightmare for young revelers in Sweden when a fire swept through an overcrowded disco in October. 63 young people died and almost 200 were injured. Earlier the same month, it was a tragedy brought about by poverty in Nigeria when an oil pipeline exploded into flames in the south of the country. More than 700 people died in the inferno, which took days to be put out. The victims had been scavenging for petrol from the burst pipeline. In Southeast Asia, the hazardous smog of 1997 threatened many areas for the second year running because of forest fires. In Indonesia's East Kalimantan, about 280,000 hectares of land was destroyed in the first few months of the year, causing estimated losses of $635 million. The year ended with another major aviation disaster when a Thai Airways plane crashed in southern Thailand. The plane plunged into a swamp while making a third attempt to land at Surat Thani Airport during a tropical storm. 101 people on board were killed, although 45 people survived miraculously. Natural disasters also took their toll on human lives this year, some descending with a ferocity that was difficult to bear. The most destructive hurricane in more than 200 years swept through Central America in November. The week-long rampage of Hurricane Mitch left a trail of devastation, with Honduras and Nicaragua bearing the brunt. At least 11,000 people were killed. At least 3,000 people were killed in China as floods surged along the Yangtze River in July and August. Floodwaters inundated more than 21 million hectares of land and caused economic losses amounting to more than $20 billion. In July again, 3 tidal waves caused by an undersea earthquake swept away entire villages in northwest Papua New Guinea. About 2,000 people were killed. The extent of human misery caused by the disaster was beyond description. Devastating mudslides caused by torrential rain killed at least 150 people in southern Italy in May. 2 separate earthquakes hit northern Afghanistan within a 4-month period. The first in February left more than 4,000 dead, and thousands more perished in June when villages in the region were reduced to rubble. In sports, it was a mixed year with off-the-field activities threatening to overshadow the action itself. The threat of hooliganism and disputes over ticket allocation dominated the news ahead of the Soccer World Cup in France. However, once the action got underway, it was a case of Vive la France as the host nation beat hot favorites Brazil to lift the title for the first time. Star French striker Zinedine Zidane is in the running for Player of the Year along with Brazil's Ronaldo. However, Ronaldo dominated World Cup post-mortem for his personal underachievement, particularly during the final. Still in France and the country's prestigious cycling race, the Tour de France, was thrown into chaos as a drug scandal turned the race into a farce, with a number of top riders being expelled from the prestigious race. Eventually, Italian Marco the Pirate Pantani emerged a worthy winner, but the sport is still reeling from the consequences of the drug scandal. In the United States, the Major League Baseball season burst into life with the emergence of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa going head-to-head for the home run record. Sosa ended the season with 66 homers for the Chicago Cubs, but it was the St. Louis Cardinals slugger McGwire who emerged victorious. He belted 70 homers to eclipse Roger Maris's 37-year-old mark of 61, while Sosa was named National League MVP. And speaking of records, Pete Sampras rewrote tennis history by becoming the first player to end the year at #1 for the 6th year in a row. The Chicago Bulls dominated the NBA yet again, beating Utah in the playoff finals to win the title for the 5th time in 7 years, with Michael Jordan maintaining his superstar status. And that was the last NBA game played in 1998, as an ugly wrangle between players and managers drags on into the new year. The topic of disagreement? You guessed it, money. And a record number of Hong Kong athletes returned from the Asian Games in Thailand, better off for their efforts. The SAR comfortably overhauled its previous Asian Games best medal haul of 12. Gold medalists included board sailor Li Lai Shan, wushu exponent Ng Siu Ching, tenpin bowler Sunny Hui, and the snooker team, as the territory achieved a new level of sporting success in the region. A new era of space exploration was ushered in last month with the launching of the first module of the International Space Station from a cosmodrome in the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan. An international joint venture, the space station will be the most expensive home man has ever built. Its total cost is eventually expected to reach $100 billion. When completed in the year 2004, the station will be a launching pad to the stars. And that was our World Review of 1998. In the quest for lasting peace and prosperity, the world hasn't had much success this year. But the efforts to achieve this have left one legacy, that of hope, as we usher in the new year and approach the millennium. Here's wishing you a very happy new year.
Last season, the Cleveland